In Judge Caprio's courtroom, a senator's wife, convinced she was above the law, made a phone call meant to save her from a parking ticket. Instead, it exposed a scandal that brought her entire world crashing down. The air in Providence Traffic Court was thick with the usual cocktail of anxiety and stale coffee. I was sitting on a hard wooden bench, clutching a parking ticket like it was a losing lottery ticket. It was a stupid mistake. I'd been rushing to my mom's place after she'd had a fall, and I left my car in a 2-hour zone for nearly 4. My heart was still pounding from the stress of it all, and now this. But there was a silver lining. The judge presiding today was the man, the myth, the legend himself, Judge Frank Caprio. I'd seen his videos online. The man was tough, but had a heart of gold. I was hoping for a little of that gold and a lot less of the tough. I watched as he dealt with the people ahead of me, an elderly man who ran a red light because the sun was in his eyes, case dismissed with a gentle warning. A young single mother with 3 overdue tickets who was struggling to make ends meet. He worked out a payment plan she could actually afford. He was everything people said he was: fair, compassionate, and with a sense of humor that could cut the tension in the room like a knife. I was starting to feel a little better. And then she walked in. You could feel the atmospheric pressure change. It was like a cold front of pure entitlement had just swept through the double doors. She was probably in her late 50s, dressed in a crisp cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my car. Her hair was a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde, and her face was pulled so tight it looked like she was facing a permanent headwind. She didn't walk. She glided, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and quiet disdain. She didn't take a seat on the bench with the rest of us commoners. She stood near the front, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on her designer handbag, her gaze sweeping over the room as if she were inspecting a poorly managed servant's quarters. My little parking ticket suddenly felt insignificant. This woman looked like she didn't just break traffic laws, she probably considered them quaint suggestions meant for other people. After a few more minor cases, the bailiff called out her name, Eleanor Vance. She strode to the defendant's podium with the confidence of a queen addressing her court. Judge Caprio looked at her over his glasses, his expression patient as always. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice calm, "you're here for a violation issued on Thayer Street. Parking in a fire lane, blocking a hydrant. That's a serious one. It carries a fine of $200. Mrs. Vance let out a delicate, theatrical scoff. "Judge," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "there was a sale at the boutique. I was only going to be a moment. There was no fire. No one was harmed. This is all just a ridiculous waste of my time." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. I saw Judge Caprio's eyebrow twitch, just a fraction. It was the first sign of a crack in his placid demeanor. "Ma'am," he said, his voice still even, "the fire lane and the hydrant are there for emergencies. An emergency doesn't schedule an appointment. What if a fire had broken out in that block? What if firefighters couldn't access the water they needed because your car was in the way?" "Well, it didn't, did it?" she snapped back, her politeness evaporating completely. "This is simply a cash grab by the city. I am a prominent citizen, a taxpayer. I refuse to pay this exorbitant fine for something so trivial." Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. The friendly grandpa vibe was fading, replaced by the quiet authority of a man who had seen it all. "Mrs. Vance, your prominence does not place you above the law. The law is the law for everyone who enters this courtroom. The fine stands. $200. This was the moment where a normal person would sigh, pull out their checkbook, and put this behind them. But Eleanor Vance was not a normal person. A smug, vicious little smile played on her lips. She reached into her handbag, but it wasn't a wallet she pulled out. It was a sleek, brand-new smartphone. "I don't think you understand who you're talking to," she said, her voice low and menacing. "I think we can clear this all up with a simple phone call." Judge Caprio folded his hands on his desk. "Is that so? And who are you calling that has the authority to overrule a judge in his own courtroom?" Her smile widened. She had him now, she thought. This was her checkmate. "I'm calling my husband," she declared, her voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Senator Vance." The name hung in the air. Senator Vance. Senator Vance. A powerful man, a name everyone in the state knew. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was it. This is how the other half lives. A problem arises, and they just call one of their powerful friends to make it go away. I watched, disgusted and fascinated, as she found his contact and pressed the call button. She was about to lift the phone to her ear, ready to whisper her complaints and have this small, inconvenient judge put in his place. But Judge Caprio wasn't done. He raised a hand. "Hold on, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound clarity. A sly glint appeared in his eye. "If the senator is going to weigh in on a legal matter in this courtroom, I think it's only fair that we all hear what he has to say." He pointed a finger towards her phone. "Put it on speaker." The courtroom held its breath. For a second, Eleanor Vance's face froze, a flicker of genuine shock cracking her mask of superiority. She had intended to have a private, intimidating word with her husband, to have him whisper threats and promises into a judge's ear. She hadn't counted on a public hearing, but her arrogance was a fortress. She recovered in an instant, a venomous little smile returning to her lips. She probably thought this was even better. Let the whole room hear the voice of a United States senator, and tremble. With a defiant flick of her wrist, she tapped the speaker icon on her phone's screen. The dial tone blared through the silent room, loud and artificial. 1 ring, 2 rings. The tension was so thick I could feel it in my teeth. Then a click. A man's voice, crisp and impatient, filled the air. "Eleanor, I'm in the middle of a caucus meeting. This had better be important." It was him, Senator Vance. The voice from the news, from the campaign ads, now echoing off the drab courtroom walls. Eleanor transformed. Her entire posture changed, softening into a caricature of a distressed damsel. "Oh, Richard, darling," she cooed, her voice suddenly high and trembling. "I'm in such a bind. I'm at the traffic court of all dreadful places. There's this little man, a judge, who is being perfectly unreasonable about a silly parking ticket. He simply won't listen to reason." There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. "A parking ticket? Eleanor, for God's sake, just pay the fine. You know the optics on this stuff are terrible for me right now." "But Richard, it's the principal," she whined. "He's trying to make an example of me. He's being rude and condescending, and I thought if you just had a word." This was when Judge Caprio leaned forward, his voice calm but carrying the weight of the entire judiciary. "Senator Vance, this is Judge Frank Caprio. I'm the little man your wife is referring to. I thought you should know you're on speakerphone in a full courtroom here in Providence." The silence that followed was the most profound I have ever experienced. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and noise out of the room. You could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. You could probably hear the senator's blood pressure spiking from a mile away. When he spoke again, his voice was completely different. The impatience and annoyance were gone, replaced by a smooth, syrupy tone I recognized from his television interviews. The politician was in the building. "Judge Caprio, my deepest apologies. It is an honor to speak with you, sir, though I wish it were under better circumstances," he said, the charm practically oozing from the phone's tiny speaker. "I had no idea. Eleanor, what on earth is going on?" Judge Caprio gestured towards the defendant's podium. "Your wife received a citation for parking in a fire lane and blocking a hydrant, Senator. She believes that her connection to you should render her immune to the city's public safety laws. She called you to intervene on her behalf. The floor is yours." It was a masterstroke. He'd handed the senator a shovel and a hole and invited him to start digging. The courtroom was mesmerized. Eleanor's face had gone from smug to crimson. Her power play had backfired in the most spectacular public way imaginable. There was another pause from the senator's end, this one more calculated. He was weighing his options. Defend his wife and be accused of corruption and abuse of power, or throw her under the bus on speakerphone. He chose his career. "Judge, let me be unequivocally clear," the senator's voice boomed, full of false sincerity. "No one is above the law. Not me, and certainly not my family. We, of all people, should be setting an example. Eleanor, I am deeply disappointed in you. Your behavior is unacceptable. You will pay the fine, and you will apologize to the judge for wasting his valuable time." Eleanor Vance looked as if she'd been slapped. Her mouth opened and closed silently, her eyes wide with a mixture of fury and betrayal. The entire room was staring at her. a sea of faces witnessing her public humiliation. Her husband, her ace in the hole, had just folded on a royal flush. "Thank you, Senator," Judge Caprio said, his tone even. "I appreciate your civic-mindedness." "Of course, Judge," the senator said, eager to end the call. "Now, if you'll excuse me. Eleanor, just pay the $200 and be done with it. We absolutely cannot afford another public scene after what happened in Newport." He hung up. The click echoed through the room, but it was his last sentence that lingered in the air, a wisp of smoke hinting at a much larger fire. Another public scene? What happened in Newport? Eleanor Vance's face, already red, turned a ghostly white. Judge Caprio's kindly eyes narrowed, the compassionate grandfather replaced by a shrewd legal mind. He looked directly at the terrified woman standing before him, his gaze sharp and penetrating. He leaned into his microphone, and his voice, now low and serious, dropped into the dead quiet of the room. "Mrs. Vance," he said slowly, "let's put the parking ticket aside for a moment. Why don't you tell the court what happened in Newport?" The silence in the courtroom morphed from stunned to predatory. Every eye was fixed on Eleanor Vance, who looked like a marble statue about to crumble. The mention of Newport had hit her like a physical blow. The air crackled with a new kind of anticipation, far more electric than the minor drama of a parking ticket. We were on the scent of a real scandal now, and Judge Caprio, with the instincts of a seasoned hunter, was leading the chase. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. The booming confidence she'd walked in with was gone, replaced by the fragile panic of someone caught in a lie. She clutched the podium, her knuckles white. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He wasn't aggressive, he was just waiting. He let her denial hang in the air, letting its weakness become more and more apparent with every passing second. "Your husband seemed to think it was significant, Mrs. Vance," he said gently. "He said you couldn't afford another public scene. That implies there was a first one, in Newport. I'm just trying to get a complete picture of the situation, to understand the context of your decision-making today." This was his genius. He wasn't accusing her of anything. He was framing it as part of his judicial due diligence. He was giving her just enough rope. Eleanor swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the room as if seeking an escape route. She saw no friendly faces, only a gallery of strangers transfixed by her impending doom. "It was a misunderstanding," she finally managed to say. "A private family matter. It has nothing to do with this." "Everything has to do with this," Judge Caprio countered, his voice still soft but firm. "Respect for the law, respect for the community, respect for public safety. It's all connected. A small act of arrogance, like parking in a fire lane, can sometimes be a symptom of a much larger problem. So please, enlighten us. What was the misunderstanding in Newport?" Her composure was completely gone. A single tear tracked a path through her expensive foundation. "It was a charity gala," she began, her voice cracking. "There was a valet service, but the line was long. I was running late to be seated at the head table." I could see where this was going. The same entitled impatience that led her to block a fire hydrant had manifested on a grander scale. "Go on," the judge prompted. I told the young man at the valet stand that I was Senator Vance's wife and that I needed my car parked immediately," she admitted, shame coloring her words. "He was a teenager, a boy. He tried to explain that there were others ahead of me, very important donors, but I insisted. I may have raised my voice." You raised your voice," Judge Caprio repeated, his tone flat. "What else?" She flinched. "He kept telling me he had to follow the rules. He was being insubordinate. I told him he didn't know who he was talking to, that I could have him fired." Her confession came out in a torrent now, as if the dam of her pride had finally burst. "I took my car key, and I tossed it at him. It might have hit him in the face. It was an accident. But he made a scene, he started crying. The event organizer came over, and my husband. Richard had to smooth things over. He made a very large, anonymous donation to the charity to make it all go away. He paid the boy's family. He told me never, ever to mention it again." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. This was so much worse than a parking ticket. This was abuse of power, assault, and a cover-up. all wrapped in a designer handbag. She hadn't just bullied a judge, she had bullied a teenage valet worker, a kid just trying to do his job, and then used her husband's power and money to bury it. The puzzle pieces clicked into place, the senator's panicked tone on the phone, his eagerness to throw his wife under the bus and pay the fine. He wasn't worried about the optics of a simple ticket. He was terrified that his wife's chronic entitlement would finally drag this much uglier story into the light. And now, thanks to her own hubris, it had. Judge Caprio was silent for a long time, his face a mask of deep contemplation. He looked at Eleanor Vance, truly looked at her, not as the wife of a powerful man, but as the person standing before him who had just confessed to something truly ugly. The room was so quiet you could hear the distant wail of a siren outside. He finally leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. The friendly old judge was gone. The dispenser of mercy was gone. In his place was a man who embodied the cold, hard weight of the law. "Mrs. Vance," he began, and his voice was devoid of all warmth, like ice cracking. "The $200 fine for the parking violation is hereby dismissed." A wave of confusion washed over the courtroom. Dismissed? After all that? Eleanor Vance looked up, a flicker of hope in her tear-filled eyes. Had she somehow gotten away with it? The judge let the word hang there for a beat before he delivered the killing blow. "It's dismissed," he continued, his voice dropping to a steely growl, "because I am citing you for contempt of court for your initial behavior, and based on your own sworn testimony in this courtroom, I am also contacting the Newport Police Department to have them reopen the investigation into the assault and battery of that young man." He paused, locking eyes with her. "Bailiff, take Mrs. Vance into custody." The word custody struck the courtroom like a thunderclap. Eleanor Vance's face went slack with utter disbelief, the flicker of hope in her eyes extinguished and replaced with raw, uncomprehending terror. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. People like her didn't get taken into custody. They made phone calls, they wrote checks, they made problems disappear. They were not the problems that got disappeared. The bailiff, a large, stoic man who had seen everything, moved with a practiced calm. He walked around the podium, his face impassive. "Ma'am, please put your hands behind your back," he said, his voice quiet, but absolute. "No!" The shriek was primal, tearing through the stunned silence. "You can't do this to me. I am the wife of a United States Senator. I demand to speak to my lawyer. I demand to speak to my husband." Judge Caprio didn't even flinch. "You will have the opportunity to do both from jail, Mrs. Vance," he stated, his voice a gavel in itself. "Your outburst has just added another charge of disorderly conduct. I suggest you stop talking now." But she couldn't. The dam of her entitlement had not just broken, it had been dynamited. All the rage and indignation she had suppressed for years, the core belief that the world owed her everything, came pouring out. "This is a joke. A kangaroo court run by a tin-pot tyrant. My husband will ruin you. He'll have your job. You'll be nothing." The bailiff didn't wait any longer. He gently but firmly took her arm. The moment his hand touched the sleeve of her cream-colored pantsuit, she recoiled as if she'd been burned. She tried to pull away, her expensive heels scraping against the linoleum floor. The whole scene was surreal. This beacon of high society, this untouchable woman, was now physically resisting an officer of the court in the middle of a traffic hearing. The bailiff, with the help of a second officer who had moved in, expertly maneuvered her arms behind her back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs closing echoed through the room. It was a sound of finality. The transformation was complete. Eleanor Vance, the queen who had glided into the courtroom an hour earlier, was now just a prisoner. Her helmet of hair was slightly askew, her makeup was smeared with tears, and her face was a mess of rage and fear. As the officers led her past the benches, her eyes scanned the crowd, pleading, searching for an ally. But all she found were the faces of the common people she disdained, staring back at her with a mixture of shock, pity, and a certain grim satisfaction. Justice, in its most raw and unexpected form, was being served. I finally let out the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The air in the room, once thick with tension, now felt clean, purged. Judge Caprio watched as she was escorted out, his expression stern but not triumphant. He looked weary, as if a necessary but unpleasant task had been completed. He cleared his throat and looked down at his docket. "Next case," he said, his voice returning to its normal, patient tone. He looked up, and his eyes met mine. "Michael Rossi." I walked to the podium on legs that felt like jelly. The crumpled parking ticket in my hand seemed impossibly silly now. I stood where Eleanor Vance had just stood, the ghost of her expensive perfume still hanging in the air. Judge Caprio looked at me over his glasses. The fire was gone from his eyes, replaced by the familiar, compassionate twinkle. "Mr. Rossi," he began, "you're here for exceeding the 2-hour parking limit on Hope Street." "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice barely a squeak. "And what's your story?" he asked. I explained about my mom, about her fall, about rushing to her apartment, and my mind being a million miles away from parking meters and time limits. I told him she was okay, just bruised and shaken, but that my priority that day was her, not my car. He listened intently, nodding slowly. When I finished, he looked at the ticket, then back at me. "Your mother," he said. "Is she a good woman?" "The best, Your Honor," I replied without hesitation. "You love her?" "More than anything." A small smile touched his lips. "Mr. Rossi, the world is built on rules. Fire lanes, parking limits, they're there for a reason. To maintain order, to keep us safe. But sometimes life gets in the way. Sometimes we have to break a small rule in service of a much larger one. The rule that says you take care of your mother." He picked up his stamp, the heavy wooden one that decided fates in this little room. "I think you made the right choice," he said. He brought the stamp down with a satisfying thud. "Case dismissed. You go give your mother a hug from me." Tears pricked my eyes. It wasn't just about the ticket. It was about the contrast. It was about the validation, the humanity of it all. "Thank you, Your Honor," I mumbled, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." As I walked out of the Providence traffic court and into the bright afternoon sun, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. The law, I realized, wasn't just a rigid set of rules designed to punish. In the right hands, it was a tool. It could be a shield for the powerless, a lesson for the arrogant, and a mirror that forces us to see ourselves for who we truly are. Today, in Judge Caprio's courtroom, I had seen it do all three, and I knew with absolute certainty that Senator Vance would be getting a phone call far more distressing than the one he had received earlier, and for once there wouldn't be a damn thing he could do about it.